And thanks for everyone for joining. I just want to remind everybody who's online that public comment is only accepted in person. And as you probably know, we're live streaming via Facebook, and the replay is always available on Facebook, YouTube, and TV 36. So I want to say adequate notice of this meeting, as required by the Open Public Meetings Act, was provided through the posting, mailing, and filing of the annual notice of regularly scheduled meetings of the Town Council on December 13, 2022. The notice was, on that date, posted on the bulletin board of the municipal building, provided to the Westfield Leader and the Star Ledger, and filed with the clerk of the town of Westfield. Ms. Lushy, may I have a roll call?
Mayor Brindle?
Here.
Council members Hapgood, Farmely?
Here.
LaGrippa?
Here.
Katz?
Here.
Mackey? Contract? Here. Dardia?
Here.
Root?
Here.
Please rise for the invocation, which will be given by Councilman LaGrippa, and then remain standing for the salute.
We meet to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, and to make decisions that promote the common good. We recognize our responsibility to the past and to the future, and the rights and needs of both individuals and community. As trusted servants, we seek support on our deliberations and on our efforts here today. May we act wisely and well. Amen.
So Jim, do you have any comments before the budget? No? Okay, great. So we're going to go, I think, right this evening, right? To Joanne Jemenden from the New Jersey Cleans Community Council. And she is here to present the 2023 Stormwater Management Award to the town of Westfield for its use of the Adopt a Drain program as a means of litter abatement. And I said, here to receive the award, our Public Works Director, Greg O'Neill, our Public Works Supervisors, Rich Eubanks and Eugene Watkins, and Dave Siegler on behalf of the Westfield Green Team. So come on up, everybody. This is a program that is a model for New Jersey, and I know a few other towns have already started it, so I'm really looking forward to hopefully everybody catching a wave. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to ask Councilman Contract to join you for a picture as well.
I just want to add real quickly that I just want to thank Joanne. Joanne used to work at Union County for a long time, 35 years. She's always been a friend of Westfield, and now she's the executive director of the New Jersey Clean Communities Council. It's just a wonderful partner to have with Westfield. And again, thanks to the Green Team, David Siegler, co-chair, Laura Strauss is not here, Public Works guys. This program doesn't work without the Green Team support, doesn't work without Public Works support in the field for these things. Again, anything you can do, it's these are small things that add up over time. So just want to thank the Green Team, Councilman Contract, and Public Works. So, and Joanne, thanks so much.
So thank you all. So, you get a picture? Picture? Yeah, here we'll get a picture. Yeah.
We'll move into the building.
Yeah, come exactly.
We have to say one more thank you to the residents. The residents are the ones who make the program happen and successful. I think at last count we have over 250 residents participating. There's almost 3,000 drains. So if you do the math, there's a lot of drains still left to be adopted. So hopefully residents will help us out.
All right, well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Was it?
So congratulations and thank you very, very, very much. So before we get on to tonight's agenda, I just have a few brief items I just want to cover. And just begin, I've gotten a lot of questions about our parks and plans that I know I addressed as a priority in my State of the Town address. So I just remind everybody, our strategic parks plan was what we did a couple years ago, was the first of its kind in Westfield. It provided a long-term roadmap for our parks and recreation initiatives and taking a holistic view of how we can improve our offerings for residents of all abilities and ages, as well as equitable facilities and access for both boys and girls sports. As I mentioned back in January, implementing several of these recommendations is a priority for this year. So in light of the budget presentation tonight, I just thought it would be a good time to provide an update on the plan's current initiatives and anticipated next steps. So I'll begin with an update on the Edison Fields project, for which we recently received 11 responses to our request for proposals for an engineering, design, and construction management firm. We anticipate a contract to be awarded in April or May after a steering committee comprised of members of the Town Council, the Recreation Commission, the Board of Ed, and the Recreation Department has had the opportunity to review the proposals and then interview the firms. So this is the precursor to going out to bid for the actual construction work, with exact timing to be driven by the Board of Ed and Edison administration in order to minimize disruption to their students. So meanwhile, we continue to forge ahead with other necessary park improvements. As part of the proposed capital budget you'll hear about tonight, $150,000 in seed money has been allocated to begin improvements at Houlihan Sidfay Field, including a long overdue permanent restroom facility and reconfigured parking and safety enhancements. The capital expenditures for these purposes will help get this work underway, and we plan to be reimbursed for $100,000 of this funding through the cell tower agreement with AT&T. We'll also continue our efforts to upgrade the town's playgrounds, which began with the first phase of the new Windsor Park playground last year and will follow with the second phase this year. As part of our continued efforts to prioritize inclusion and accessibility, we will be applying for a grant to upgrade the town's first ADA accessible playground and Memorial Park, and we'll also be donating materials towards the community-driven initiative to make the Lincoln School Playground accessible for children of all abilities. There's also important beautification and programming efforts underway as we continue to work in partnership with the Friends of Brightwood Park, the Friends of Mindawaskan Park, the Garden Club of Westfield, and the Tree Preservation Commission. We recently provided details of the comprehensive and long-term tree care plan for Mindawaskan, and hopefully you've seen the new blooms on Daffodil Hill, which will be complemented by wildflowers over the next year. And perhaps most significantly, as an important next step towards realizing our strategic parks plan is the work we are planning for Tamaqua Park. And I'm just going to hand it over to Councilman Katz, who's the liaison to the Recreation Commission, and he can provide additional details, which he mentioned at last week's meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. Last month's Recreation Commission meeting, the Commission recommended moving forward with hiring a firm to create a design plan for Tamaqua Park. The town will issue an RFP to hire a firm to create a detailed design plan, which would be paid for by the Parks Improvement Fund. Building upon the initial concept that was recommended in the Strategic Parks Plan, we expect that the Tamaqua Plan will now incorporate an additional 7 acres of scrub brush that has been deemed as sufficiently delineated from wetlands and suitable for an additional recreation area. In response to community input, we anticipate the comprehensive plan to include walking trail improvements, renovated basketball courts, new pickleball courts, a permanent ice rink to ultimately replace the facility at Gumpert Park, additional playing fields, a dog park, upgraded bathroom facilities, and handicapped accessibility. Additional parking and a new entrance and exit from Lamberts Mill Road are also being considered in order to reduce car circulation and make the park safer for walkers, bikers, and joggers. Perhaps what's most exciting about the Tamaqua plans is the chance to create recreational opportunities for residents of all life stages and abilities, from passive enjoyment of the park to optimizing playing fields for our organized youth sports teams, to meeting the needs of our seniors, advancing the growth of girls' sports by accommodating the expansion of girls' flag football, field hockey, and ice hockey programs. The Recreation Commission, working with new Recreation Director Megan Schaefer, will be soliciting input from all stakeholders, including neighbors, sports leagues, and general park users, to ensure the final plan delivers on the needs and desires of our residents. The final long-term plan will be implemented in phases with funding through grants, public-private partnerships, and capital. We're excited about the possibilities of Tamaulipas and the opportunity to add diverse offerings, as well as continuing to expand field capacity for our growing youth sports programs.
Thank you, Councilman. And there's another item that we'll be voting on tonight, which is an ordinance on second reading amending the Sidewalk Cafe ordinance, which includes updated parameters and fee for downtown parklets. I know there's been some talk and a little bit of misunderstanding about this parklet ordinance, so I want to make sure everyone has the full background and context for these changes. And so I'm going to hand it over to Councilman Parmalee in his role as Chair of the Code Review and Town Property Committee to provide those details. So, Councilman Parmalee.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So the changes proposed by the ordinance tonight are the result of a request by the Downtown Westfield Corporation, who's been working with Downtown New Jersey to identify parklet best practices statewide and establish consistent and equitable practices for downtown businesses. And the goal here is to balance the parking needs of all of our downtown businesses with enabling and expanding outdoor dining by standardizing the parklet requirements so that every business is treated equally. It's also intended to ensure that parklets are utilized by businesses that would actually maximize their benefit to the public while minimizing the times that they're vacant, freeing up parking from underutilized parklets. So the Code Review and Town Property Committee, which is chaired by me, together with Councilman Contract, who's serving as Vice Chair, and also includes Councilman LaGrippo and Councilwoman Mackey, looked at peer communities when establishing the parklet fee schedule. And considerations in setting these fees, which are consistent with other Main Street communities, included the cost borne by the town to actually erect and dismantle the parklets, as well as the lost parking revenue resulting from the parklets themselves. We also took into consideration the actual seasonal use of the parklets in determining the appropriate window that the parklets may actually stay in place. So the cost for each parklet is $2,500 for the season, and the program is completely voluntary so that each business can decide if the economics make sense for them to pay the parklet fee to further expand the outdoor seating beyond what is already enabled by the Sidewalk Cafe licenses that are also issued by the town. And common use of the tables will also continue to be available on Open Quimby, which is sponsored by the town itself. So the DWC, just so it's clear, the DWC supports this legislation, as does the Bipartisan Code Review and Town Property Committee. While many communities have abandoned parklets altogether, we are committed to continuing to offer this popular outdoor dining option in a way that both supports and balances the needs of all of our downtown businesses and the residents themselves.
Thank you, Councilman. And lastly, we're going to be moving on to the introduction of the 2023 municipal and capital budgets. It's unfortunate that Finance Policy Committee Chair Councilwoman Hapgood, she's unable to be here tonight, and she sends her apologies for an unavoidable conflict. I do want to thank Town Administrator Jim Gilday and CFO Scott Olson, who worked diligently over the last few months with the town departments to minimize our costs as much as possible without sacrificing service to residents. And I don't know if people understand the length of time and dedication that goes into putting together a municipal budget. It's considerable from both the Finance Committee, all of our town employees, and certainly Jim and Scott, who are leading the charge. So I do want to thank not only Councilwoman Hapgood in her role as chair, but also Finance Policy Committee in general, the Vice Chair, Councilman Mark Parmalee, Councilman Emily Root, and Councilman Scott Katz, as again, many hours to produce a budget that reflects the residual challenges presented by the pandemic and an increase in statutory and non-discretionary expenditures, and lots of exciting opportunities for 2023 and beyond, and Jim's going to take us through all of that. So you're going to hear all about it in tonight's presentation. Essentially, the town performed very well in 2022, in large part due to reserves, healthy tax collections, and strategic budget decisions made to position the town of success for the long term. And very importantly, in this challenging environment, we reaffirmed our AAA credit rating, conducted a remarkably successful bond sale, and generated just under $3.7 million in surplus to end 2022 with a $9.4 million surplus balance. And I just want to say, I was telling earlier, yeah, I speak to mayors all over the state very regularly, and this has been a really challenging year for most municipalities with skyrocketing health insurance costs, inflationary costs, and many unexpected expenditures, and it is quite remarkable, and I think you'll see very proud of the budget that we've been able to produce in light, and it just really speaks to the considerable tradition of strong fiscal management of the town. We're also introducing the capital budget tonight, which includes the next phase of what continues to be an unprecedented multi-year road paving program. There's going to be various intersection and sidewalk improvements, recreation enhancements, and continued investment in DPW vehicles and equipment. And really, again, very proud of the work that this team has done to invest your tax dollars while keeping our average municipal tax increase at just 1.4% over the past 5 years. And I know there was an article just, I think the other day, about tax increases across the state, and there are only across the county, only 4 municipalities had slight lower taxes. Of the remaining, they were had raised taxes. We were the second smallest increase at 0.53%. So it was pretty happy about that. Something we should all be proud of. So I'm going to hand it over to Jim, who's going to share all the details and get the budget presentation underway. Thank you, Jim.
It is working, okay. No setup, no portable screen, no moving. You can stay here. Okay, good. For the first time in many, many years, we're able to say that we have screens here that we can actually use and technology we can use. So thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to go through the budget presentation, and again, sorry, Councilwoman Havigood's not here. She usually is my partner in this, but we'll try to go through it quickly. And again, it's a lot of good news, as we talked about, and we'll share some details of the presentation of the budget this year with you. So reminder, again, of the team of people we have. The Mayor mentioned myself, our CFO, Scott Olson, our new Assistant Town Administrator, Heather Ray, who had our first budget process this year after coming from one single department. Now she's involved in all departments, which is an eye-opening experience, so that was great. Auditing firm, bond counsel, of course, and then, of course, the committee we mentioned before, Councilman Havigood, Mark Parmalee, Scott Katz, Emily Root. And, of course, one last thing to mention, we have an Investment Advisory Council, and they were very instrumental. One example last year, we'll hear a little more about tonight, but we had an example last year about buying some police vehicles. We did some professionals in the community came and helped us out to the IAC, and they had recommended, after Chief Batalora had recommended some leasing options, and we actually went with leasing vehicles, which actually is proving to be much more beneficial to us, saving on gasoline costs, saving on maintenance costs, and of course budgetary costs. So, and of course we have hybrid vehicles we've been leasing as well, which is great. So some good things the IAC is doing with us. 2 slides in the beginning about 2022. The Mayor mentioned a few things. Just a reminder, this is a quick little graph about the taxes, or the tax piece that the town council is responsible for. You see on the screen here the little bright green piece of the circle. That is the municipal tax levy. That is what the town council is responsible for. Every other piece of that puzzle is something that this governing body, unfortunately, has no say in. That's the library board, that's the special school district, the county, and the county open space. So your taxes are made up of all those pieces. Town council here only really is responsible for that small green piece, which is 16.67% in 2022. And again, just a reminder of the highlights the Mayor mentioned. 2022 was a good year despite still going through COVID impacts. Surplus was replenished to about $9.4 million. Conducted a great bond sale in a very difficult market with interest rates, but not only do we reaffirm our AAA rating, we had a very attractive 2.49% interest rate on almost $10 million. We were able to accomplish capital budget goals, basically paving about 6 miles of road for the town and 15 miles of road by utilities at no cost to the town. We'll hear more about that tonight in the presentation. Tax collections in Westfield, very fortunate, over 99%, and it continues to be that, which is great. So again, as the Mayor mentioned, we weathered these years very well. It wasn't easy. Every community's had challenges. Westfield's no different, but some of the choices we made in 2020 when the pandemic hit were able to put us on a very good path as where we are today. So 2022 ended very well. We go to 2023. We have these continued strategic drivers we've been using the past number of years here things we're looking at every time we look at our budget. Strengthening communication capabilities always. Again, you see here tonight, we have technology in this room for the first time, which is something that that's one example of that. Enhancing services and operating efficiencies. We've talked about it last year. We'll talk about it again this year. Some notable department metrics of how we're serving the public more efficiently. Prioritizing infrastructure and safety, road paving, safety issues we'll hear about tonight. And of course, improving economic development and tax ratables. So those are all things we have in the back of our mind as we go through every single budget, and it is working. 2023 budget process and timeline, just a reminder of how we do this. We have a capital budget, which we're introducing tonight on first reading. We are required to submit to the state a 6-year plan. We focus on 3 years because that's very realistic. So the council looks at a 3-year plan particularly. That's tonight. We'll actually be doing one of those 3 years, introducing that. And of course, that focuses on drainage, roads, parks, equipment, et cetera, vehicles for different departments. Department budgets, this has been going on for a while. I always say to the council, the budget process is never done. It's a rolling process all year long. So we've been looking at budgets since last November. Department heads submit information. We then spend a good portion of the beginning of the year with the finance committee and meetings with auditors, with our bond counsel, with department heads, presenting all these things. And then basically, we do that from January to early March. We then have to wait for the state to give us information on state aid and any information we might get from them. We have to produce all the documents that are required to be sent to the state. And then, of course, here we are tonight. This is the introduction of the budget to the public. Tonight, we introduce the budget to you. We will post a lot of information on our website after tonight. And then there's a time period for review, and a public hearing is set for April 25th, which is the public hearing on the budget. So the process has worked very well, and it's, I think, actually pretty thorough. 2023 budget priorities. Top 3 categories: managing spending challenges, which we'll get into, conserving surplus for future years, and producing the lowest possible tax increase as we can each year to the residents. So spending challenges first. You see here on the screen, top left corner, 3 major issues we had this year, no different than most other municipalities. Big one, statutory required expenses. We get a 6.75% increase in bills we receive. Those are things like increases in health insurance, pension costs, Social Security, Rahway Valley Sewage Authority, or sewer fees, utilities, no different than anyone else. Gasoline prices have skyrocketed. Utilities, heating, gas, all those things have skyrocketed. So these are bills that are given to us, $1.2 million increase before we even started the budget. So again, a lot to handle, and again, most municipalities, like the mayor said, are handling or facing the same kind of increases. Salary and wages up 3.1% this year. This is a function of new employees being added in certain departments, public works and police particularly, and actually later this year, fire department, as well as contractual obligations. We're going through negotiations now. We had some negotiations settled earlier this year, so that's always provides a little extra money when you don't know the final result of negotiations. And then lastly, operating expenditures up 10%. We'll get into this particularly a little bit later. There's a big increase in cost. I'm happy to say that a lot of the increase in cost in operating is offset by revenue, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Conserving surplus, mentioned before, we had a very good ending of 2022. We basically almost replenished our surplus back to what we had used the year before, almost $4 million that we have in the bank starting of the year. Basically, we use surplus to offset these big increases we get, and also to manage the final tax rate back into a number that's acceptable to the public, acceptable to the council to move to the public. So we're keeping, basically you'll see a little bit later too, $3,995,000 is being used this year in surplus, which leaves a balance of 5.4 in the bank for future issues, future years. Very healthy surplus being left over, and a slight increase in use of surplus, as we said. Actually, I'm surprised it's not more with the huge increase we had in statutory required expenses, but we only had to use $200,000 more than last year. And lastly, that all leads to how we get to the tax impact. So total appropriations up 5.46, which we'll get into some more detail, all the issues here. American Rescue Plan money is in our budget again, second year in a row. It will drop out next year, and we plan for that. So we're eager and we're mindful of keeping ARP money uses to one-time expenses. So we're not dependent upon that money when it drops out next year. We have continued revenue losses, which we'll get into as well. And we're managing that. Conservation Center, for example, and building permits are 2 bright spots where we have increases in revenue there. But despite all these challenges, this budget that's being introduced tonight represents a 1.98% tax rate to the residents, so just under 2% again for the 3rd year in a row. And over the past 6 years, it's been a 1.4% increase overall on average. Here's a quick chart just showing that, again, the history of how the tax rates have varied over the many years. And again, the last couple of years have been very consistent. And so, again, we're trying to manage as best we can with the challenges that we face, particularly this year with the big increase in statutory required expenses. Another little snapshot here, it's easier to see on the bigger screens. We've done this slide for a number of years after this. So we have a comparison here of surplus use to the times we're in a financial crisis, and I know them very well, lived through them, where we had very little choice but to use most of our surplus to get through. Comparing that to similar COVID years, different surplus balances. But I think the key thing is here to see, while we have a slight increase in surplus use this year, as we said, $3,995,000 in the bottom of the slide there. We're using only 42% of our total surplus. We're actually, in the very difficult financial crisis years, we're using 89, 90, 95, 98%. Obviously, there wasn't much choice there. So we're leaving healthy balances, and in the past 3 years particularly, we've been fortunate to replenish just about the money we've been using, which is important. So again, the comparison is an important one, but the point about this is we have a healthy balance in the bank for 2024 and beyond. Jumping to appropriations, quick little pie chart here to show you where the money goes on the appropriations side. So again, as you see, the two big categories, statutory required expenses, health insurance, pensions, utilities, all the things that we get bills for. Of course, the other big piece is salary and wages. We are a public service business. Our money's in people, and people serve the town. So it's a big expense for us, but actually not horrible when it comes down to the employees we have here and what we do. 37% of a budget, usually you see that in a budget where you have 40-45%, so we're doing well there. Again, debt service you see there, well managed right now. Operating expenses, rather good. One thing I want to point out here, there's a piece of the pie there called reserve for uncollected taxes. It's not a small piece. It's basically 5% of our total budget, $2.6 million. I always just remind everybody, this is a piece of the budget we, the town, must budget because we are the tax collector. This is not something the county, the schools, or library has to do. Whatever they put their budget in, we must pay them. If we don't collect the money, this is our only reserve we have to make ourselves whole. So it's a requirement we have to have, and it's 5% of our budget, which is important to note. A little more detail on the allocations for a 3-year snapshot here, 21, 22, and 23. You can see some of the changes here. So again, we've gone through some of this in a different format. Salaries and wages up 3.1%, which is really a little less than $600,000 year over year. Operating expenses, $552,000, almost 10% there. Debt service, again, you can see debt service across the board has been pretty flat, and that was by design. We've actually managed debt service. Last year's bond sale we did was by design as well. And so we do know that debt service will go up next year, the things that are being authorized this year. So we're prepared for that. And again, back to the ARP money, that's one-time uses that will drop out. That will be able to offset any debt service increases next year. Statutory required expenses, you see obviously big increase, $1.2 million. And capital improvement fund, big increase there. And that's something we have the ability to put in there. ARP money is offsetting some of those costs. Last thing to mention on this slide, on the appropriation side, big reduction in the deferred charges. Just a reminder to everybody what that is. Deferred charges is money you put in the budget to pay yourself back for things you might have borrowed in prior years, or you put money in there for emergency appropriations for things. So that number dropped down for two reasons in 2023. Last year, you might remember our presentation, we had two things included in there. We had our last payment of our revaluation costs. Revaluation was paid over 5 years through a special emergency of $140,000 a year. Last year was our last of the 5-year payment for that. Also last year, you might remember we talked a lot about COVID losses. One of those COVID losses was Memorial Pool. Memorial Pool had a loss of $318,000. That was included in the town budget side. It made the pool whole and brought the pool back dramatically in a great financial shape. So those two numbers that were in last year drop out, and now we have $5,000 in there for obviously everything we have planned for, which is just a placeholder, and that number can vary from year to year. It's a flexible number, but that's why we have a big reduction, because the pool money came out one-time shot, and the revaluation cost, which we've been paying for 5 years, dropped out. On the revenue side, very simple. Total revenues, we do expect is up 1.9 million. And of course, the tax levy is up 780,000, which is 2.59%, and we'll get into some more of that in a minute. We talked about it a lot. These are some of the numbers. The key expense drivers this year for us, we mentioned pensions, we mentioned utilities and our sewer costs. These are not small numbers, as you can see. We did rather a little better on insurance than we normally would have done, but still not a small number. That's our joint insurance fund cost and our health insurance cost together. Police and fire department salary and wages, again, contractual obligations, adding some new employees we talked about, particularly in the fire department. Public Works, same thing. We have a new contract with them. We made some adjustments there to bring them up to comparable salaries in the marketplace and adding new employees there. Capital Improvement Fund, we mentioned that before. Capital infrastructure items offset by ARP funds. We'll get into that in a little bit. Public Works operating. So here, big increase in Public Works operating. We have some revenues to offset this from the Conservation Center. We have actually a pretty exciting wood chip program where we're going to be, we authorized a contract a few weeks ago to authorize a company to come in and take wood chips out at a cost. But we also charge those wood chips being actually placed there. So the revenue we actually get in offsets the expense. So, but the revenue, the expenses actually has to be listed here, but it's offset by the revenue on the revenue side. Recycling contract is built into the DPW budget. That's a $500,000 line item every year. That was after public bidding. And tree planting, I mentioned tree planting because we continue a very aggressive tree planting schedule. We planted 600 trees the past 2 years. We expect to do the same thing again in 2023. And the mayor mentioned it before. We just talked about some planting partnership we have with Mindawaskan, Friends of Mindawaskan Park, where we have trees that need to come down for health reasons. We're replanting the park, and of course, Friends of Mindawaskan are helping us and donating some money as well. Last two items here, police and fire operating budgets, very small number comparatively speaking between the two. And I mentioned reserve uncollected taxes. That's a number that must go up every year. We normally have it go up by $50,000 a year, but again, a requirement for us and us only. No county, no school, no library. So some of the details of the key drivers, and you see this whole page adds up to about $2.9 million. Our total increase in the budget was 2.7. So, you can see we had some other reductions other places, thankfully, but these are not small numbers. And a lot of other communities are suffering with these numbers even worse than we are in some of these cases. On the revenue side, I've done this, is probably the last time we'll show this slide after a few years, but it's just important to illustrate some of the revenue challenges we continue to have due to COVID. COVID changed a lot of things. You see on the left-hand side, court and parking revenue before COVID hit, $460,000 for court, 1.6, almost $1.7 million in parking. COVID hit, of course, everything changed. Revenue dropped off dramatically in both. It's been inching back up in both, but still we're over almost $600,000 less in revenue in these two categories alone than we have been in many years. So that's a hard thing to make up in any one budget, no matter how healthy you are and how much surplus you have. So it's just an illustration of how hard it is to come back, and other towns suffer the same things. I mentioned before ARP funds. So this is the second year of ARP funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds. So every town received funds. We received 2 tranches. This year, the $1,555,000 is the second tranche. We are using them for these various things. We have revenue loss we're trying to make up for, $450,000. We have needs in the police department to do some enhancements to the dispatch center. So that's $405,000. And the other $700,000 is broken down in a few different categories, similar to what we did last year, putting money in the capital budget for capital infrastructure projects, $50,000 for town facility improvements, and as well as $50,000 back to the Downtown Westfield Corporation to do things in the downtown. Example, what they did last year, part of that money was used to establish a new blade sign program to encourage businesses to put new signs up, encourage people to come downtown, see their stores from a different perspective. Highly successful. We have a lot more blade signs downtown than we had before. Businesses loved it. We were able to offset that cost for businesses putting signs in the downtown. So ARP money, this is the last year we'll have this money. So next year, this drops out. We're aware of that. We plan for that. And so obviously, we're using this as most we can for one-time expenses, so we're not relying upon it. It was important to go through and just explain how we get to the tax levy and the tax rate. People often mistake the two. They're not the same. The tax levy is different than the tax rate. So this is hopefully a simple way to just understand how we get there and how this equates to what comes out of your pocket as a taxpayer versus what the tax levy is. So you start with total expenditures. Our budget this year, $51,890,000 is what's being presented. That's our total expenditures. We deduct from that the revenues we anticipate to get that are coming from on our own, from outside taxpayer sources at $20,863,000. And the difference of the two equals a tax levy. That's $31,026,000 and change. That is a 2.59% increase over last year's tax levy. Okay, so as you might see, it's over 2%. All right, you're allowed to go beyond 2% when you have exceptions for things you can't control, health insurance, pensions, for example, and debt service as well. We don't have that issue right now, but you have exceptions for that as well. You then take that tax levy and then you divide it by the total value of property in the town, otherwise known as the rateable value. Our rateable value is $8 billion and change, all right? It's a billion, yes, billion with a B. So $8 billion, we have very good ratables in town. They continue to grow year by year, depending on what comes on the rolls of the town. That number then is divided into the tax levy, which then produces the tax rate. That's the rate that's used to calculate each person's individual assessments on their homes for town purposes. So our tax rate is 1.98%. Again, under the 2% number we've actually tried to keep under for many, many years. So on an average assessed home, or the average assessed home in Westfield in 2023 is $812,000 and change. This new tax rate on the average assessed home produces an increase for municipal purposes only, $57 for the year or $475 per month. Under the circumstances of the statutory required expenses we've actually had handed to us, it's a pretty manageable number for municipal purposes. Of course, just to be clear, this does not include school purposes, county purposes, or library purposes. I think good news, I've heard that the county is trying to keep their number flat again. They did the same thing last year, so that's always helpful. Last year, with the county's flat number, the town's number, school, and library, taxes actually were stabilized in most cases, or even down 0.1% overall. So all the pieces add up and help the residents. But in our case, what we're able to do with this budget is produce basically $475 a month extra for town purposes. And I would argue that most people, the school is obviously a huge part of it, but even if you have kids in school, everything else you depend on comes from the town. Your police, your fire, your public works, your snow plowing, your leaf collection, your recycling center, your tax collection, your recreation programs, the list goes on and on. We provide the majority of services people depend on in this town, and we're doing it for 16% of your tax bill. So it's a pretty significant. So hopefully that was helpful to understand a little bit about how we get the tax levy and the tax rate. Linda started this last year. I wanted to continue it. It's hard to see. This, by the way, this presentation is going to be on our website, so everyone can go back and view it if they want to. But some just notable department metrics here which are important. It's important to highlight some of the work that people in this town do, the volume of work they do. And these are just some notable metrics. So, police department, 57,900 calls last year. That's, you might say, wow, I expected that. That's up over 35,000 calls the year before. All right, the Chief Badaloro has done a new process of how to track calls differently, plus the volume of calls has dramatically increased. So it's not a small thing. This police department averages 158 calls per day on average. We have a very active department, and I just want to thank the police department for doing a phenomenal job. This kind of new license plate, so we had over everything added last year through the capital budget. We added license plate reader cameras in certain areas. That's actually helped the police department respond to things, car thefts, crime in the areas. So new technology has helped us. And of course, we continue from a revenue perspective. Not every department has the ability to create revenue. The police department does. And so we actually charge, when you see utility jobs going on, PAC&G, Elizabethtown Gas, American Water, you see a police officer out there, yes, they must come through us, they're assigned by us, and then the utility is paying us for those police officers, for the police officer's time, the vehicle, and the gasoline. So we make money back to offset our costs when we purchase or lease vehicles. So we're actually reducing costs to our taxpayers by doing those things. So impressive statistics for the police department. Fire department, no different. They had 3,032 calls last year, which I believe Chief Douglas was up over 2,600 the year before, roughly. So another very busy year for the fire department. Thankfully, the calls are not in the same police department number. We don't have many fires in town, but it's again a very impressive number. And again, the Fire Prevention Bureau, which is a division of the fire department, over almost 3,000 inspections last year. And that's, again, your home inspections, fire alarm inspections, fire smoke detector inspections, a lot of activity going on a daily basis from the fire department. No different than the building department. Building department, 2,600 permits issued last year. That was up over 2,400 and change the year before. And they performed 9,500 and change inspections in 2022. That's about 37 inspections a day. Again, proof that people are reinvesting in their homes and properties, and our staff is able to keep up with that and do a very good job of it. Two other little informational points from departments. Recreation/Memorial Pool. Memorial Pool had a phenomenal year last year. Past couple of years, as they came back last year, they actually reached capacity again for the first time in many years. So we were sold out of memberships, had a waiting list. So we had 9,700 members, which is our maximum. The year before that, we had 8,000 and change. So again, a very successful pool season. Almost 11,500 people came in as guests. People want to bring their friends to the pool, bring their family to the pool. It's a wonderful thing. That created about $163,000 of revenue to the pool, again, helping to be successful. Reminder of the pool for a moment. And people sometimes take this for granted. I'm a very proud pool member for over 30 years. I worked there myself. I taught the Goodman's kids lessons for many years back in the day. The pool is not tax supported. It's a completely a membership generated facility. So every dollar goes in the pool and we don't spend goes back into the pool. No tax dollars go into the pool. And yet it's one of the most successful municipal pools in the entire state of New Jersey. Lastly, almost 6,000 participants in recreation and pool programs throughout the course of 2022. Highly successful year, amazing information on recreation and pool. And Heather, even though she's not in the department anymore, she's going to make sure that still happens. And we have a new director there, Megan, new assistant director, Dan. We're excited for some new opportunities as we go forward. Lastly, Public Works Department, a couple little tidbits from them. 2,300 some odd permits from the Conservation Center last year, which is similar to the year before. Bulk waste use is up. If you remember the bulk waste program, we had to discontinue on the streets because the vendors weren't there. We started our own center program, which started off a couple hundred permits. We're now up to 1,260, and that generated 247 tons of material to be disposed of, which is up from 204 tons the previous year. So the bulky waste program is really taking off at the center, which is great. And some really cool recycling statistics. We mentioned in a pre-conference meeting, these are some kind of interesting numbers. Styrofoam, 30,000 pounds of styrofoam. Give you a sense of what that means. I think Councilman Country mentioned that people in Westfield are buying a lot of things with styrofoam, but give you a sense of what that means. The entirety of Union County collected 54,000 pounds of styrofoam. We were 30,000 in Westfield alone. So that just gives you the sense of the volume we're taking in our conservation of styrofoam alone. Scrap metal, 110 tons recycled at our center. Cardboard, 98 tons. Plastic bags is a new program. We started now, I think it's 2 years old. 7 tons of plastic bags. Rich Eubanks, supervisor who was here before, is traveling and disposing those off at the recycling place almost every single day. Huge, successful program. Corks, wine corks particularly, 800 pounds of wine corks. So, very healthy community on wine corks. Batteries, we started a battery program a couple of years ago. 2.5 tons of batteries recycled out of the waste stream, which is amazing. And lastly, we started this program many years ago, clothing being donated and recycled with a company we have, and 22,000 pounds of clothing. So again, just our conservation center, the recycling opportunities, both organic debris, recycling has not only been a huge success for the town. You heard tonight we got an award for the Adopt a Drain program, but just a real asset. Most towns don't have this kind of asset that we have in this town. It's an amazing thing that we have it. So there's some things we're just, some numbers that actually are fun rather than the budget numbers. They're not so fun.
So Jim, I have to expand on my consumption comment. We clearly are drinking a lot of wine too, with 800 pounds or 800 pounds of cork.
Yeah, no, we definitely are. Okay, so a couple things. We'll move now to the capital budget real quick. So tonight, in addition to the municipal budget, capital budget. We're interested in capital budget. So first reading on the capital budget tonight. Second reading will be set for April 11th. And if adopted, we will be able to start spending money in the beginning of May. Majority of the capital budget is roads and drainage, as you might expect. Basically, this year, I know it says 5 miles here. Actually, we have about, I'll show you another slide in a minute, actually over 6 miles of road the town will be paving this year. Some of those are state aid jobs we receive money for, and some of the costs are being offset. I expected roughly 15 miles of road to be paved by utilities. Again, this is something that we'll get into in another slide, but is unprecedented. Our town engineer, who's a consultant engineer who works in multiple towns over his career, he said he's never seen the volume of paving going on in a municipality that we have. Not only on our own, 5 miles a year roughly or more, but utilities paving roads is unprecedented. What we've done here is really working very well. Various intersection and sidewalk improvements, we'll get into that in a minute. Public safety items, continued investment in public safety items for police and fire. We mentioned before dispatch center service upgrades. Part of this includes security cameras and not only town hall replacement, but some of our parks. Recreation items, we'll talk about this in a minute. The mayor mentioned it early on tonight. Houlihan Sid Fay Fields. We want to actually put some seed money in and get that process started for new bathroom facility, expanded parking. And ultimately some of that will be reimbursed by a potential grant or potential money coming in from a potential cell tower going in at the Conservation Center. Continued DPW vehicles and equipment, we talked about that before. And lastly, while we're authorizing $3,806,000 in capital, we do expect close to $800,000 in grants to offset that, plus maybe the cell tower money and our own down payment money. So our philosophy and strategy for debt service that we control has been to try not to authorize any more than roughly $3 million or less of new net debt service each year. And with this budget, with the money coming in expected for grants, we're right in that ballpark. We're getting a lot of stuff done. So a little more detail about some of the various intersection and sidewalk improvements. This budget includes these following items. There's some improvements on West Broad Street in front of the Little People Daycare. We've been asked over the past year or two to create a drop-off pickup spot, which is off the roadway. That'll be a small capital project there. Intersection improvements at First and Westfield. Some curb bump outs. This little graphic on the screen here is not any intersections, it's graphic, but shows you some intersection improvements, curb bump outs, crosswalks. Same with North Avenue, South Yukon and Hillcrest. This came out of some of our bike ped plan. We're gonna try some restriping of that intersection this year to see how restriping can actually make that intersection function change. If it's successful, that may turn into actually infrastructure, physical improvements in the future. That's if anyone has driven there, know it's a very difficult intersection. Also, drop-off pickup area in front of the Westfield Y to come out of the roadway. We're working with the Y on that. Purchase of additional solar power radar speed signs. The one you see here in the picture on the right is the one on East Dudley or West Dudley by Roosevelt School. These have proven to be very successful. Solar powered speed signs showing people their speed, and police can tell you that this actually, when people go over above the speed limit, they do slow down when they see these signs, so it's been very helpful. Purchase of new pedestrian activated crosswalk beacons on Mountain Avenue at potentially 2 locations, Cable and Road Chestnut intersections. We've had some of these included or installed over the years. Again, highly successful when they're installed. And then lastly, this North Avenue corridor sidewalk improvement grant. So we applied for this grant, Councilman Dardia, when you're at least 2 years in a row. Took us 2 years to get it. This was something that came out of the bike ped plan that we had from a couple years ago to do sidewalk improvements and enhancements on North Avenue between roughly 4th Avenue by Gumper Park to Elm Street downtown. And that's sidewalk improvements, intersection improvements. So this will be some money. So this capital budget includes money that will ultimately be offset by this grant. But Congressman Malinowski, before he left office, was able to finally procure this for us. So that's gonna be very helpful. So again, you can see the budget does touch, small areas. We try to do this every year, these small kind of improvements where we can. But these are not inexpensive items. So that's it on the various intersections. Back to road paving just for a minute. Again, this is just a little graphic about how we've been doing with road paving and volumes. And I mentioned it before, but it's pretty remarkable. 2019, the council passed an ordinance to require utilities to pave roads curb to curb, end to end, when they cut into the road more than 50 feet in length. Very simply. That's something that didn't exist before. Right before we passed that ordinance, we had a partnership with Elizabethtown Gas at the time that they agreed to do this because we had a huge amount in 2019, a very large amount of Elizabethtown gas work that was going on. We partnered with them, we had a great success with them, we then passed the ordinance, and since then you see, except for the COVID year in 2020, the amount of utility paving going on at no expense to taxpayers directly has been unprecedented. And what's anticipated for 2023 is we have about 15 miles of road, 14.8, which Elizabethtown Gas expects to get paved, and about 6.6 on our end that we expect to get paved. Will be, if our capital budget gets approved, that process will start on the bidding process, and hopefully summer and fall, we'll be doing our roads. We do think Elizabethtown Gas will be starting their roads in the next month or two. They had some carryovers from last year they weren't able to complete, and they'll start that very soon. So it could be another busy summer, but we're on pace to really have an unprecedented amount of paving done again in this town, which is great for the road structure. And that leads to the road assessment. You might remember 2019, we did a road assessment. We weren't able to really use it that well because of COVID the following year, but we have used the road assessment program, which in essence has created what they call a PCI score, a pavement condition index score for each road in town, or segments of road, depending on how long the road is. So that was actually done in 19. COVID hit. We had a very small, like every town did, it's a very small paving year. We used the opportunity to create a process where we had the PCI scores presented on the website. Roads are listed in alphabetical order. You can see your PCI score, where you're ranked. We then had a process that the Finance Committee and ultimately Public Works Committee decided to try to get any PCI score under 60 paved. So our average PCI score for the entire town was, I think, 66 at the time. So not a bad score, but we wanted to be higher. So we looked at a worst to first process, paved the worst roads of rating to the best. That didn't really work that well because that meant the contractors jumping around town. You know, there's no efficiency, no grid approach. So he might be going to Tuttle Parkway, going Virginia Street and coming back. We needed some efficiency. So our engineer at the time and the Public Works Committee created a grid approach. So we used worst to first as a backdrop and then created a grid system so that we were actually going to be awarding contracts for grids in town. So not every road is going to be the worst, but they're going to be bad rated roads in a grid. So we're doing grids so it's efficient. We're not popping back there year after year to do one road at a time. It's worked highly successfully so far on the roads we've been doing, and we're going to continue that. So the 2023 roads that we advertised in the past couple of years is what's being done this year. This summer, we will post the new road assessment program information, and we will also post the 2024, 25, and 26 grid approach for the next 3 years, so you can see if your road's not been paved recently, where they'll be in the process, and when your road will be paved. And we're going to be looking at between 4 and 6 miles of road a year, depending on budgetary costs. So, but this road assessment program has been a very, great program. It's not a very expensive program either. The technology they have today is frankly amazing. There was a truck that came to town last fall, drove every street with lasers on the truck and all sorts of things I don't understand, and they come back with a lot of data, and it's pretty remarkable. So we'll be posting that again in the summertime to be our assessment tool for the next couple of years after 23. So in summary, again, budget we have, we think it's a very good budget. We're in good financial shape. We have surplus in the bank for future years. Not every town can say that. We only had to use a slight bit more surplus this year, even despite some very large increases handed to us. We have ongoing priorities, as we talked about in the beginning, looking for diversification of the tax base. We're also investing in downtown economic recovery. We talked about that for quite a while, the past number of meetings. Streetscapes, parks, recreation, that all continues. And of course, looking for recurring revenue sources. That's very difficult for municipalities. But we have things at our disposal, like the Conservation Center. It's been a highly successful program. But we're looking at all these things. We're constantly trying to keep the tax rate flat from year to year. And again, we've been successful so far, but as Linda would say if she was here, every budget year is unique. Every budget year is a different story, and you cannot expect any budget year what you're going to see. At most of the towns this year, as the mayor mentioned, a lot of very difficult costs are being handed to towns. We're being able to manage it as best we can this year. Some other towns are having some very difficult times with big increases, but because of the places we are and the AAA rated town we are, we're in good shape. So that's my presentation, Mayor. Any questions or comments from the council?
Thank you, Jim. Excellent, as always.
And again, just a reminder, so this presentation will be on our website for permanently, of course, as all our past ones have been. The state form budget will be posted on the website after tonight as well, which is, you can see all the past ones if you want as well. As we move through this process, ultimately in the same budget area, you'll see the final adopted budget when it's adopted be posted there. You'll see our audit reports there, and you'll see what they call the user-friendly budget, which is a state form that is posted and required to be submitted to the state at the adoption process. Our CFO is working on it now, which takes all this information that's in our budget forms and stuff you've seen tonight and repackages it into what they hope to be a very easier way to understand it. It's not that easy, but it's better than the state form budget. So that'll all be things on the website over the next month and a half you'll be able to see, and you can see past years for about 5 or 6 years on the website.
And just remind everybody when the vote on adoption is.
Sure, so again, tonight's introduction for both capital and municipal budget. The municipal budget will be set for public hearing April 25th, council meeting, and after that is the expected adoption. And then the capital budget introduced tonight, expected to be public hearing and adopted on April 11th. So those are the two dates for adoption of both of those.
Thank you. Any questions from the council?
Yeah.
Councilor Grippo?
Jim, I just want to ask, regarding the budgeted, the interest on investments for the past 2 years, it appears we missed it by 57% last year for interest on investments. So if you just, do you know why that is, or how we got to that point?
Sure. So we've actually, we've had some reduction in interest on investments. A couple things to mention about interest on investments for municipalities. And I have some good news to share too. Steve Meyer is discussing this today. So interest on investments for municipalities, we're not like a personal bank where we can just change our money around on a daily basis and get the best rate. We have money in various banks in town. We also use what's known as a New Jersey Cash Management Fund. The interest rates on those have been very low the past few years. Finally, they're catching up to the rest of the marketplace, and that's just happening now in the past few months, where we're seeing getting like 1, 1.5%, 2%. Now we're going up to 3, catch up to 4. I think in the marketplace, Scott, I think it's like 4 or 4.25 or something in that range. But we're finally catching up to that. So we're in the process of moving money to various accounts this year. But last year we really didn't have much choice. All the banks we had and cash management fund was only producing 1, 1.5, 2 at most. So our money was moving around those accounts, but didn't have a lot to get. So if you look back in a number of years, our interests have been up and down, depending on the year. Good news is, it looks like we'll be actually exceeding our number. As I mentioned, or I usually mention in the slide presentation, every municipality is unable to anticipate more revenue than you collected the year before unless you have a legitimate reason to do so, such as increasing a fee, for example. In this case, we can't anticipate more. We only collect what we collected on interest. With the money we're changing around, interest rates catching up, I think we're going to exceed our number in 2023.
So even though the interest rates have been going up the past few years, so.
The municipalities take a while to catch up. The most aggressive account is the New Jersey Cash Management, and just now, literally the past month or two, we talked about this in the finance committee quite a bit. Linda was actually harping on it quite a bit, because she's very much in that world and saying, let's move around. So Scott obviously doing everything he can to move that money around, but we should be on pace to exceed our number in 23, but we can't anticipate any more right now because we didn't collect that last year.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to ask about the municipal debt. Obviously, the $57 million for 1 Westfield Place has ballooned the municipal debt to a debt service by 102%. So, I mean, I know we're going to try to offset that with pilot money, but what's, the concern to the municipality going forward?
I think let me make sure the wording is correct. So our debt service is not affected. Okay, so that's important. So while $57 million that was authorized has been submitted on our supplemental debt statement as part of our statutory debt now, right? And what we're doing tonight on first reading, the capital budget, $3.8 million, will also become part of the statutory debt. What hits our debt service is when we actually issue the debt. So use our capital budget example. So $3.8 million tonight. We don't really sit on money. We actually do the projects right away. So we're going to go out this year and do these projects, roads and all the projects we just listed. We'll actually need money to do that. So we have cash on hand, the CFO will go back and forth and use the money on hand to pay those bills, and then we aggregate our authorizations. Tonight's an authorization for $3.8 million for capital. Those authorizations aggregate them to a critical mass, usually in the neighborhood of $9 or $10 million, and we go out to bond sales. That's where we're actually borrowing the money that we don't have any more in the bank, so to speak, to pay cash on hand. The $57 million we've authorized is merely just that, it's an authorization. It doesn't hit our debt service, but it is on our statutory debt rolls now. So our budget was not affected this year by that. It will not be affected next year by that, and likely the year after either. I believe the sequencing in the planned proposal for 1 Westfield Place is the first bond issuance might be in 2026, I believe, which means if the year you issue something, the debt service kicks in the following year. So if anything was to go well, 2027 might be the first year we'd actually have to pay debt on something. And again, as you mentioned, it's expected that pilot money would come in to offset that debt service in full. Again, that's years away, but that's the plan.
But I do think it's important to read it, because you said we'll try to offset it with pilot. We will be offsetting with pilot, because the debt is not issued until the revenue is guaranteed to cover it. And I think that's a really, really, really important distinction. So we won't be trying, we will be doing it, and the debt doesn't issue without the revenue to back it up.
It's an important question, because it can get confusing. We're not, that 57 million, or what we're doing tonight, 3.8, is not debt service to us yet. It's only authorization to spend money. We only have the debt service when we issue the actual bonds or notes, short-term notes, which we've done in the past. And that's been a part of our strategy. We've stayed in notes for a few years to pay interest only, to manage budget peaks and, budget increases, and then get a critical mass together to do a bond sale, which we did last year, we talked about earlier, so we can manage that debt service. We have no major spikes up or down, and that keeps, taxes stable.
It's probably all just reminding the public that the way the project was structured is with the special assessments, if the revenue projected in the pilot doesn't come in as expected, Streetworks is on the hook for the difference for 3 consecutive years until their pilot revenues are 1.15x the debt service for 3 consecutive years. So I do think it mitigates the risk tremendously. I had a question, Jim, about just, so obviously I think one of the challenges is the non-discretionary expenses. You talked about it. So can you talk a little bit about health insurance? Because I think that's one of the big drivers, and sort of the town's point of view on it. I know we switched to self-insurance to try to manage the increase. How's that worked? And do we think we should be exploring changes to that, to better mitigate the risk going forward?
Sure. Yeah, last year we switched to self-insurance. Actually, this year, while it's an increase, it was actually not one of the major drivers, where a lot of towns are experiencing that being a major driver. And part of that is because of our switch. But, self-insurance is a different way of doing things. We're paying upon claims versus full value. And so we're constantly managing that. And yes, it's always on the table. It could be a big swing any given year, especially when you're paying on claims versus you're paying fully insured, a flat number. So we've already been talking to our health risk manager on that for the past few months. Our CFO and I have been on the phone past few months on that. We've even had a meeting with the finance committee briefly to discuss that on this year's impact and what we might expect to happen this year. And of course, what we have to, if it doesn't happen, we have to make some changes. It could be going back to fully insured, it could be changing carriers, or it could be staying where we are. We had a good year, but we have to manage that. So luckily though, while we had an increase in health insurance, it wasn't as large as it could have been. The big driver this year, was the pensions. It was over $500,000 in pension costs, which is again a bill that's done by the state. Every town gets its actuarial analysis bill that's handed to us, and that normally for us has been $250 and change. It was over $530 and change this year. So that was one of our bigger drivers this year. And that's something we can't really do much about. And of course, sewer fee was an increase, and utilities was a big one too. Utilities, gasoline, the biggest driver there, but a lot of our other utilities went up due to inflationary costs. Now, that's something that's been very well managed for the past number of years, but that was $200,000 alone in utilities, which is not a very number we see often. As I mentioned, last thing to mention, as I mentioned to the finance committee, the nice thing about this budget, we were able to manage those costs as best we could, but we know that some of the costs are not going to be repeating next year. And the ARP money we have in, we plan for that to fall out to offset other things. So the puzzle pieces are together. We'll have to see how it pans out the rest of the year. But I think the plan is very good right now.
Are you using the same broker, or is it the same for the insurance? It's the same person? Okay.
Yeah, the broker comes from the annual RFP process.
Okay.
And then this is the same broker that moved this to self-insurance and they're managing right now. But again, it's a 1-year contract every year.
Okay.
So, and we got the RFP every year for that too.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got, it's not so much a question as more of a comment. I've been doing this budgeting process for the past 4 years, and I just have to say, I know it's been said 1,000 times, but I think it needs to be said again, just how fortunate we are to have Jim, Heather, and Scott Olson, and Councilwoman Habgood being kind of key players in this process. This, by the way, together with all the different department heads, this is not a simple money in, money out analysis. It's a complex puzzle with, a variety of statutory and legal restrictions and requirements, and, absorbing the non-discretionary increases that Jim pointed out. I mean, there's almost $3 million worth of increases that represent, roughly 5% of the budget itself. And it's almost like a game of chess when you have to, you know, with the way Jim and Scott and Heather are able to, they're not looking to 2024 or just through 2023. You know, this whole process is a strategic game of playing out into 2025, 26, and beyond. And, you know, they all do this in connection with the department heads who are constantly, I've always been impressed by how they're always thinking of either ways to become more efficient or ways to cut costs. And a lot of the different, for example, the recycling programs that we see up there that are revenue generators are all so important to kind of the health and fiscal health of the town. And I just have to again commend you, Jim, and the team for, you know, getting us through this and pointing it out. And I think I thank you for the work that you've done.
Thank you very much, and again, as the chiefs are here, of course, Scott Olson's here, other department heads were here tonight. It's a team effort, and again, I say it to you guys all the time, we're very fortunate to have a great team of employees in this town. Department heads and employees under them. It's, doesn't happen very often in places, and we are very fortunate to have that great team. So thanks for the support of the council.
And I do just want to add one thing, which you didn't mention, but kind of behind the scenes, some of the investments that have been made in automation and so forth, in particular in the buildings department. We talk about doing more with less, and a lot of it is we've been able to keep the staff flat, but process a lot more stuff because the investments that have been made in automation. And so it's been much more user-friendly, it's more efficient for the staff, and a better residential experience. So I just wanted to make sure that those investments earlier have now come to fruition as well.
Yeah, that was something we mentioned on notable metrics of departments, building department. I will say that we're in the process now of taking the building department technology and rolling out in the health department. That's in the process right now, so next year we'll have some more information to share about the health department. So we're trying to take that technology, roll it out as where we can, and make sense so residents have easy access online, easy access, you know, to pay for things. Heather was instrumental in the recreation department a couple of years ago, starting that recreation, online pool payments, online, you know, program payments, et cetera. That's really, and then she did the same thing with Richie Eubanks for Conservation Center permits. We had to adapt during COVID, and no choice, couldn't do it in person, and we never left it. It was just that. And so it's those are things that, little things, you're right.
Yeah, it's been great.
So.
So thank you very much. Anybody else? All right, great job, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, so moving on, Ms. Lashy, are there any advertised hearings?
Yes, Mayor, we have an advertised hearing tonight for General Ordinance Number 2023-10, an ordinance amending the sidewalk cafe ordinance of the town of Westfield. Anyone wishing to be heard on General Ordinance Number 2023-10, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, Mayor, you may close the hearing.
This hearing is closed. Councilman Parmalee, please move for the adoption of General Ordinance Number 2023-10.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move for the adoption of General Ordinance Number 2023-10 on second reading, and ordinance amending the sidewalk cafe ordinance of the town of Westfield.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Contract. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yeah, yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried. May I have a motion to approve the minutes for the Town Council Conference and regular meetings of March 14, 2023?
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Dardia, second.
Second.
Second by Councilman Root. Any
Hey, I
dis-
was not at the last meeting.
That's, I think, and you were absent too, right? So Councilman LaGrupo and Parmalee are abstaining. All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? This motion is carried. Now it's time for open discussion by citizens. Anyone may come up to the microphone and speak to the council on any subject on which we have jurisdiction. Please state your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Yep. I got it. Doesn't it? I know, exactly. So.
Good evening, Frank Fusaro, 422 Stanley Avenue, Westfield. Since virtually the entire town of Westfield has been designated as an area in need of redevelopment, including all the surface parking lots, can you please let us know if there are any current proposals from any developers to develop the remaining lots? If not, are there any future plans to entertain proposals from those developers regarding the surface parking lots? And if so, is there a time frame for any redevelopment projects on those lots? Another question I have is, has the town received any reply or comments from the New Jersey State Department of Transportation with respect to the egress driveway required for the north side or the proposed north side parking garage located on the corner of Central Avenue and North Avenue? And finally, can you please confirm when the tax abatement on the Lord and Taylor property will begin for HPC Streetworks? Thank you.
Hi, Carla Bonacci, 603 Lawrence Avenue. Regarding the capital plan and the $3.86 million, I was curious how the conclusions are met as to what projects will be pursued. So I know that's a difficult process, and I'm wondering if you have state of good repair projects, if you have discretionary projects, and what process you use to make the determinations that you made. And it'd be great to know which projects you deferred, because I don't see anything being done in the core downtown in terms of improvements. I also think it might be a good idea with your PCI score for the roads, since North Avenue will be getting so much construction activity once One Westfield Place starts, that you start to track that and develop a baseline so you can understand the wear and tear of the construction truck activity on that road. And I had one more question, but that's it for now. Thanks.
Susan Goodman, 322 Arenda Circle. After the last couple of months of coming here to these meetings, I have now come to the conclusion, and I will not stop, but I have come to the conclusion that this is complete nuisance and waste of my time talking to you, because you really don't listen, you don't want to listen, you don't want to compromise, you just want to have it your way, and that's the highway. So I will continue to go to all the residents, as I have been, and mobilize those of the 70% that do not like your fantasy, your corporate fantasy plan for downtown. When I drive through town, yesterday it took me 25 minutes to get from the center of town to the Clark, Rearton Road and Clark. It's gonna get worse. When I go through town and I pass North Avenue and South Avenue and I look up and down, I say to myself, this is gonna be terrible. And that's what most of the people say. And I hope that the environmental and the social and the financial and the architectural negatives that are gonna occur, and they will not supersede your fantasy positives. And I will make it my point to work very hard, even though no matter how long it takes, to get every one of you out of office and put some common sense individuals in here that will listen to the majority of the people in this town and give them what they want. Every day, I see larger and larger homes being put up. And when I look at their property tax, they're paying 2 and 3 times, like I told you, the structure that was existing there. I ran a business. I understand it's not as simple as in and out. I had loans, I had debt service, I had leases, I had staff, I had pensions, I had supplies, I had taxes, I had always worry. I had to project always months ahead, 2 years ahead. There were always changes going on in the dental industry, equipment that had to be bought, and things that had to be done. So I know what it's like to run. A town is no different of a business than my business. But I wonder, with all these new homes going up, with 6 bedrooms and 7 baths, and 5 bedrooms and 6 baths, from 2,000, 2,200 square feet to 3,000, 4,000 square feet? What are you doing with that tax money? That's what I want to know. And so do the other people that live here in this town. So I will continue to get some common sense people in here that don't want to tell me that if they're working with this corporate giant is going to make us green. How many green gases are you going to burn bringing in all that equipment and all that building material and ripping up that surface parking lots and putting in the big garages? And you say the surface parking lots are going to be heat builders? Well, what were your 3 to 4, 5-story garages going to be? They're going to be heat builders too. None of your cranes are going to be clean energy run. None of the trucks bringing all this stuff in is going to be green energy run. And then you're going to have to make sure that Streetworks is going to pay for all of the police that are going to have to patrol all this stuff. So I'm going to make sure that we get some common sense people in here. I was going to run against you, Emily Root. I was going to give you a damn run for your money. But I have a debilitating autoimmune disease and my doctors pleaded me not to do it. So you're in luck. Not this time.
Tony Laporta, 409 North Chestnut Street. Yeah, very good time to ask this question because we're doing budgets, and I've done budgets when I was working, and I enjoyed doing budgets. What I found out about budgets is the things that you don't see, that's what you want to find out. You want to dig deep into each line. So as I was sitting here, I'm like, well, why am I not seeing something? Let's talk about professional positions we have in this town and how much we pay for them. Now, the professional positions are outside of the public bidding where you go for the lowest bid, and we don't want that. You don't want to have the cheapest professional. But we all know those public positions are political positions. And that's just the way it is in government, just not this town, all towns. So I'm not striking that. What I do think we need to know as taxpayers are what we're paying for these public positions, town attorney, planning board attorney, board of adjustment attorney, how much we paid for all the people that worked on this overdevelopment that you just approved, the one Westfield. So I think we need to see that. I'd like to see that. Taxpayers deserve to see that. And then compare that to what it was in the prior administration. We had some numbers up there from prior administration. Let's compare how much we're paying these people compared to the prior administration, okay? Also, lawsuits. Town is sued often. People fall, people trip, people feel they're being discriminated against. A lot of reasons. I'm not blaming that on you. A lot of reasons. But I'd like to know how successful we are in these suits. How many suits have come in? Do we win them? Do we lose them? Do we settle out of court? These are all, when they're a matter of public record, we deserve to see that. I'd like to see, almost like I'm a big baseball fan. Maybe some of you are. Like a box score. How many up? How many out? How many wins? How many strikes? So what I'm asking you, Mayor, to do is to make public, and I'd love to see it. I'll come down to town hall and I'll pick up the information. Or if you want to talk about it, I don't expect that you can do this tonight, but if you want to talk about it next week, in 2 weeks, the professional positions, how much they're being paid, compare that to the prior administration, and lawsuits. How many lawsuits have we had? Go back a couple of years. How many lawsuits have we had? Do we win? Do we lose? Do we settle out of court? Anything that's confidential, certainly, we can't say that. But things that aren't confidential, if they're lawsuits and they're settled, they're a matter of the public record. First thing. Second thing, there's a lot of construction going on in this town, and when that construction is done, I'm talking about condominiums, townhouses, that sort of thing. When that construction is done, what is that going to do to bring in, what tax revenue would that bring in to our budget to offset expenses that we have. Now, maybe you could just give us an estimate. If you have that tonight, that's great. If you have to wait 2 weeks, then you have to wait 2 weeks. But these are the things that I personally would like to see, and I think some members of the public also would like to see. And it's just a matter of public record. Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I close this portion of the meeting. And I'll address some of the questions that came up. Mr. Fusaro, you said that we had declared the entire town an area in need of redevelopment. It's actually not quite right. It's an area in need of rehabilitation, and they're very different. And so, are there any current proposals? No. There was a developer that came, I don't know, about a year or so ago on a proposal for, I remember which one was it? A Waterson lot, thank you. That just, any interest, this is what we're willing to do, but it didn't really go anywhere. There are no current proposals. We're not particularly interested in any particular proposals on any parking lots, certainly at the moment. So, I mean, obviously, we're working on One Westfield Place. So no, to answer your question, there are no current proposals or any expected proposals, quite candidly. Regarding your question about the DOT on the North Side Garage, I think there's a meeting set up in a couple weeks, I think, with like, I don't know, about a dozen members of the DOT and lots of members of our team to discuss not only the North Side Garage, but the entire project, piece by piece, to go through you know, all the details. As I had said previously, the DOT had come to the preview center. There wasn't anything that they saw that immediately gave them cause for concern. But this meeting will go into the specific details of that and what, you know, and see if there's any, you know, revisions that need to be made. And the pilot for Lord and Taylor does not start until they get their certificate of occupancy. So they'll continue to pay conventional taxes until they get their CO. And the pilot will go in waves for the pilot will begin on that particular project or building or whatever it may be when they get the CO. So you'll see the pilot will start in kind of various phases based upon this CO. So again, there's no gap in between when they pay conventional taxes and when they're actually delivering pilot revenue to the town. Regarding Ms. Bonacci, I think Jim, I don't know if you caught the question, if you want to address the capital project process?
I just wanted to say that, I think Ms. Bonacci mentioned North Avenue. So North Avenue, South Avenue, county roads, not under the town's jurisdiction. So we don't score those roads. But of course, as you know, they're major arteries through our town. Because they're collector or arterial roads, they get paved much more frequently than most other roads, and those are paved by the county and or the state. But her comment's a good one, so we'll see if obviously if they have any metrics, more than happy to reach out to them and see what they do. But I know part of North Avenue from I think the firehouse to the Garwood line is expected to be paved this year, finished up. The other half was done in town last year, and from the South Avenue from the traffic circle to the Scotch Plains line is expected to finish up this year as well. So both those roads will be newly paved in the past 2 years, but those are not roads that we have jurisdiction over.
And Jim, I think her other question was our process for assessing capital projects and how we determine, you know, what's being used and what's not being used. If you want.
I mean, the big part of the capital budget is the roads, of course. I mentioned in the presentation about how we, you know, since the road assessment programs come about, we do the grid approach with, using PCI scores and getting the most efficient use of the contractor that we're hiring from an efficiency perspective, mobilization perspective. Many of the other projects are really requested by departments. Public safety issues, police department, fire department, public works, could be equipment purchases. We do have Greg O'Neill, our public works director, when he first started here, put together a multi-year equipment replacement program. We've followed that as best we could. Of course, some years we have more money than others. Police and fire, no different. They have needs. For example, this year, a fire chief, you know, basically came and said, look, last year I got, you know, gear washers for the department. This year I need replacement hose. But he's also planning out years ahead where he has replacement apparatus. So he's using small requests some years, larger requests other years. So in reference to deferring things, we defer that in a planned approach, no different than the police department. Another example, this year we have dispatcher enhancements, security cameras. Last year we had, information or technology for the vehicles. And next year he already has plans there. So there's always things being deferred or placed in the right year.
And to that point, I know she had mentioned downtown improvements, but the downtown capital improvements typically would come from the DWC, correct?
Yes, correct.
And maybe you can explain a little bit about how that partnership works.
Sure. CWC will request various capital improvements. Right now, the One Westfield Place program, some of the things that they would normally be talking about are basically going to be part of that project. Streetscape improvements, lighting, benches, and so a lot of that stuff's going to be done. They've asked for other things. I mentioned the blade sign program. That's a capital thing they wouldn't normally be able to do on their own. They have a facade grant program they do through their budget. They also did an app last year that we helped them through with capital money to create an app, which is going to be rolled out this year. So they're really asking us for things they can't do in their own budget, or there has been some precedent in the past to partner with the town on larger projects. The one that comes to mind is one from many years ago where we did a sidewalk improvement on a grant they applied for, and we actually paid for half along the South Avenue corridor there, the famous curvy sidewalk with the lights, so it was a streetscape program. So, but a lot of their requests are streetscape related that are larger, and because One Westfield Place is in process now, a lot of those are going to be engulfed or incorporated into that project.
Got it. Great, thank you.
And then one last thing to say,
Yeah.
all these requests go through the committee process.
That's right.
Finance Policy Committee ultimately makes these recommendations, but Public Works Committee, Code of Town Property, and Public Safety, I mentioned tonight. So the Public Safety Committee, we discussed this only a few months ago, and tonight, a lot of those requests that came in from residents, from business owners, we prioritized with our traffic consultant, came up with the concepts, and we're able to incorporate most of them this year. They're not huge projects, but they're all very small, one-off capital projects we're able to incorporate from year to year. There's very few things that are deferred unless we had so many requests we couldn't handle them all in 1 year.
Got it, thank you. And Mr. Laporte, to answer some of your questions you asked about the professional positions, it's kind of interesting that you asked that, because one of the things that this administration implemented for the first time in town history was an RFP process for our professionals. They had never done RFPs for any of the professionals that the town had used, whether it be a town attorney, planning board attorney, or any of those. So for the sake of transparency and to ensure that the town was getting the best and the most for its money, we introduced an RFP process for the first time in 2018. And it did actually result in several significant changes, including to our health insurance provider that had previously been a political appointment. So it's interesting that you asked the question, considering that was a process that wasn't in place probably when you were in office, and it could have been. And you asked about the redevelopment money for the professionals. Just to reiterate, on any redevelopment professionals, that's not paid by for the town. That is reimbursed to the town by the developer. So while, yes, there has been significant amount of fees and consultant services paid to our redevelopment team, they work for the town, they are accountable to the town, but essentially we take their bills and we hand them off to Streetworks and they reimburse us. So there's absolutely zero taxpayer dollars that have gone to any of the redevelopment professionals that have supported us on this project. And regarding lawsuits, you're absolutely right, they are public record, and they are usually all publicized. The results of all the lawsuits are typically picked up by the press, so I would suggest you go talk to Matt Kadosh over there, and he can give you the rundown on all of the outcomes of legal lawsuits, because he's reported on all of them as they've been decided. So with that, we are going to move on to bills and claims. So Councilman Parmalee.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move in bills and claims in the amount of $403,079.50.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Grippo. Any discussion? All in favor? Yes. Opposed? This motion is carried. Next on the agenda, reports of standing committees, beginning with Finance Policy Committee. Councilman Parmalee.
Thanks, Mayor. I have 11 resolutions, 5 of which I'd like to move in as a package. The first one's a resolution authorizing the Chief Financial Officer to refund Recreation Department fees. Second's a resolution authorizing the CFO to draw warrants for overpaid taxes for 2023. Third's a resolution to extend contract for Westfield Memorial Pool concessionaire. Fourth's a resolution to amend an award of contract for electrical upgrades to the council chambers, which you can see here. And the fifth is a resolution to defer a local school tax.
May I have a second? Second by Councilman Katz. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? This motion is carried.
And then next, I'd like to move a resolution to adopt a temporary capital budget.
May I have a second? Second. Second by Councilman Contract. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes.
I'd also like to move a resolution to introduce and approve the 2023 municipal budget.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Root. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
No.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
Next, I would like to move a resolution to introduce and approve the 2023 Special Improvement District budget.
May I have a second?
Second?
Second by Councilman Katz. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
I'd also like to move a resolution authorizing the CFO to cancel capital improvement authorization.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Contract. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
I'd also like to move a resolution to approve temporary emergency authorizations.
May I have a second?
Second.
Councilman Agrippo, any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yep.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
And then last, I'd like to move a resolution to authorize the CFO to make a budget transfer.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Root. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yep.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
Okay, on to ordinances. I'd like to move General Ordinance Number 2023-11 on first reading, an ordinance for calendar year 2023 to establish a cap bank pursuant to NJSA 40A 4-45.14.
May I have a second? Second. Second by Councilman Dardia. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Motion is carried.
Interesting. Finally, I'd like to move Special Ordinance Number 2023-02 on first reading, bond ordinance to authorize the making of various public improvements and the acquisition of new, additional, or replacement equipment and machinery, new communication and signal systems equipment, and new automotive vehicles, including original apparatus and equipment in, by, and for the town of Westfield in the county of Union, state of New Jersey, to appropriate the sum of $3,860,000 to pay the cost thereof, to make a down payment, to authorize the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation, and to provide for the issuance of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of such bonds.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Contract. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Contract,
Yes.
Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Katz, second.
Second.
Second by Councilman Agrippo. All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed?
Yes.
This motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned. Another budget presentation.